Today, we count down the top 10 most valuable DC comics of the year 1972. These are not only the most valuable, but historically the most important comics released that year from DC Comics. Let's count them down. Ranking in 10th place of the year is Adventure Comics 416. This special all-women issue is also a 100-page super spectacular, which was what DC's new gimmick was at the time, and print run estimated 216,000 copies. Now you have to keep in mind that these 100-page giants hadn't really been done before by DC, and comics at this time only had a 20-cent cover price, and here they were coming out with 50-cent comics. They did sell well, but they couldn't have sold as well. And of course, being thick square-bound issues, a lot of them get damaged. And this is also a white cover, making it a tough one to find. So this issue features a cover by Bob Oskner, featuring all the DC super females of the time. This book ranks 10th most valuable of the year and 54th most valuable DC comic of the 1970s. There are 95 copies graded on the CGC census, all grades combined. There are only 17 copies grading 9.6 or higher. Heritage Auctions sells a lot of comic books, but they've only sold 16 copies of this since the year 2000. Looking at the Overstreet price guide for all grades year by year, you can see that this book has not really budged at all in low grades in almost 20 years here. So just fairly common books and still quite affordable, of course. And in high grades, it's also been sold at $220 now for the last 9 years in a row. But if you want to see how the really high-grade copies are higher than 9.2s on the CGC census, check out ebay.com sold listings and also gpanalysis.com to see what all the past graded copies have sold for. On the census, we see that there are only 4 9.8s, 13 9.6s of this book on the census. In 9th place of the year is a book that's only become a major key in the last few years. New Gods #7 features the first appearance of Steppenwolf, the primary villain of the Justice League movie. And a lot of speculators jumped on this book. This book also features the origins of Mr. Miracle and Orion and of the New Gods. We've got Jack Kirby cover right here. This is a 52-page giant, 25-cent cover price. Print run estimated at 250,000 copies. Ranks 9th of the year and 42nd of the decade. There is now 500 copies graded, 31 high-grade copies, 34 sold at Heritage of this exciting Jack Kirby cover. In Overstreet price guide, this book has been stalled for the last 5 years pretty well in all grades. It's now a $265 book. On the census, there are 8 9.8s and 23 9.6s. Number 8 is Supergirl #1. This special issue came out 13 years after the character was created, but this is the first time she got her own title ever in her short-lived 10-issue series called Supergirl. And we also have Zatanna with a backup story in this issue. Bob Oksner art. He was the hot artist for drawing females for DC at the time. This book ranks 8th of the year, 41 of the decade. Print run estimated 175,000 copies. Over 500 copies graded, 82 high grade of this one. And Heritage has sold 29. And it's got this banner logo, which was very popular at DC in 1972 on many of their titles. The book also has been stalled for the last few years in all grades, currently sitting at $270. On the census, there are 28 9.8s and 54 9.6s. Number 7 is All-Star Western #11. It's rare for a DC Western to rank high on the list for price, but this book features the second appearance ever of Jonah Hex, DC's most popular Western character ever. We've got Nestor Redondo cover art. This is the last issue actually of this series, and it's the second most valuable Bronze Age Western comic, and of course, the second appearance of Jonah Hex. Print run estimated 125,000 copies. It ranks number 7 of the year and 35 of the decade. The census is slowly climbing up, almost 200 copies graded, 24 high grade, Heritage 21. Another 52-page giant, 25-cent cover price, yellow background cover. We also got El Diablo, Powell Smith, and Batlash in this issue. In the Overstreet price guide, This book has not done that well in low grade. In fact, it was worth more 20 years ago than it is now. And in high grade, this book has been stalled for a decade at $300. There are 5 9.8s and 19 9.6s of this one, which brings us to number 6. We get another Jack Kirby book, The Demon #1, with the first appearance and origin of Etrigan, who is the demon. Print run estimated at 250,000 copies. Story, cover, and art by Jack Kirby. This book ranked 6th of the year and 36th of the decade. There is a whopping 1,160 copies graded, including a lot at the top, 81. This is not a rare book, but lots of demand for key Kirby books. Heritage has sold 70 copies of this book, 20-cent cover price. And this book had a nice little jump just in the past year alone. So in the last decade, you basically doubled your money in low grade and doubled your money in high grade. This book is moving. There are 19 9.8s and 62 9.6s. And now we're on to number 5. This is only Batman in our top 10 this time. It's Batman 238. It's another 100 super spectacular page issue, 50-cent cover price. It's also known as DC 100, issue number 8. We've got the whole cast, a gang of DC Popular Legion of Superheroes members over the years on this cover. And it's a wraparound cover by Neil Adams. High demand for him at this time. We've got Golden Age Adam and Sargon reprints in this issue, even Plastic Man. Doom Patrol Origin also is reprinted, and there's an unpublished Golden Age Adam story featured in this issue. Print run estimated 185,000 copies, ranks 5th of the year, 32nd of the decade. There are only 117 copies graded and no high-grade copies at all of this book. Heritage has sold 15 copies only. In the Overstreet Price Guide, a little bit of a bump this year in all grades, but in the last decade, you can see book has only gone up a couple dollars in low grade, but it has not quite doubled in high grades. It's now a $350 book. On the census, the highest graded copies are 9.4, 6 copies, and 12 9.2s. Very tough at the top end for this book if you're looking for top grade books. Number 4 of the year is another Jack Kirby related book, Mr. Miracle #4, first appearance of Big Barda, Jack Kirby cover and story. Print run estimated 150,000 copies, ranks 4th of the year and 28th of the decade. Lots of speculators jumping on this book in recent years, almost 600 copies graded compared to just 7 years ago when there was only 42. There are now 35 high-grade copies. Heritage has sold 27 of this 25-cent giant issue. And in the Overstreet Price Guide, it's been stalled for a few years, but definitely has had a big jump before that, because the book has quadrupled in price in low grades in the last decade and gone up about 4 times as well in high grade. And this book has 6 9.8s, 29 9.6s on the census. Now we reach number 3. This is Swamp Thing #1, classic, iconic book. This gives us the true first appearance of Swamp Thing, though he did appear in House of Secrets 92 with a different name and a different origin story. So you can debate if this is just a revised version of the original or if this is a new first appearance. Anyway, lots of demand for this book. Print run estimated 176,000 copies, if not higher. And we also get the first appearance of supporting character Matt Cable, who would later become a villain in the Sandman series from Neil Gaiman. This book ranks 3rd of the year, 25th of the decade. There's another one of those banner logos at the top like Supergirl had. On the census, this book has gone crazy. Over 2,200 copies graded, 152 high grade. Heritage has sold 243 of this classic #1 issue. In the Overstreet Price Guide, it keeps slowly sneaking up in all grades in the last decade alone. Not a lot of movement in low grades, but the book has gone up about 50% in high grade, now at $425. On the census, there are 33 9.8s and a whopping 119 9.6s. None of these Kirby books are rare, but the demand is so high for them. The next book on our list really stands out as an iconic DC book of the 70s. It's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Treasury Edition, with a hefty $1 cover price. Remember, comics are only 20 cents. So with inflation, you can see how expensive this book was, aimed at only young readers. So who bought this? It would have been a tough one, smaller sales for sure. And for decades, it was believed that this was the first issue of the limited collector's edition Treasury series from DC, but it in fact is not. This is a one-shot, the first Treasury-sized comic that DC ever put out. It's a scarce book listed in Overstreet. And of course, this book would start a new trend of this format, which of course was very popular in the 1970s. And this is, of course, the most valuable Treasury comic ever made, not just the first one. Print run estimated to maybe be 100,000, but that might be too high. We don't have sales figures. It ranks number 2 of the year and 19 of the decade. The CGC census has no copies, as they do not grade Treasury-sized comics. And Heritage has only sold 4. So you're only going to find a couple copies ever listed on eBay. This is really tough to find. In the Overstreet Price Guide, in the last 20 years, really no growth at all in low grade. You've actually lost money. It's been settling. And in high grade, the book has only gone up a little bit. In the last 10 years, it's gone from $410 to $460. It's valuable due to its rarity. And there you go. There's all the contents if you want to stop and read all of that. And a lot of this is reprints from the early 1950s DC annual Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer series. And number 1 of the year by far, All-Star Western number 10, the first appearance of Jonah Hex, the most iconic new cover or new comic character for DC in 1972, and the most valuable Western comic of the 1970s as well. Cover art by Tony DeZuniga, one of my very favorites. This book ranks number 1 of the year and even number 8 of the entire decade. Print run estimated 125,000 copies. There are 590 copies graded in all conditions combined, 29 high grade. Heritage has sold 63 of this 52-page giant, 25-cent cover price. In the Overstreet Price Guide, this is another book that's been stalled in lower grades for a long time. No growth at all in 20 years in low grades. But high grade, it has been sneaking up just a little bit. And you can see in the last 20 years, it has gone up about $400. But this is a slow climb on this one. On the census, there are 7 9.8s and 22 9.6s. So it's interesting when we look at this whole list that the only books that are still growing in price really are the Jack Kirby books. Everything else is already high priced and had its peak about 20 years ago in the late 90s, when we had the big boom and all the rare Bronze Age books had massive jumps in price. And I was part of that whole collecting field there. So I appreciate all these rare books and I've had them all at some point. Let's compare the top 10 on the CGC census. Most of these books have not that many copies graded. Swamp Thing number 1 is by far in the lead, 2,200 copies, followed by Demon with 1,100, All-Star Western 10 with 590. On the low end, Rudolph has no copies graded, so it's not even on this list. And then we have Adventure Comics 416 with only 95 copies. Now, considering that has Batgirl and Supergirl, etc., all on the cover, and it's a 100-page giant, that book seems to possibly be overlooked. There are very few copies at the high end on that book on the census. Batman 238 is the surprise winner with the fewest high-grade copies. They're just not out there. And the book with the highest grade copies, again, is Swamp Thing number 1 and Demon number 1. Top 10 books of DC 1972. This series continues every week, so please subscribe to this channel, and thanks for watching.